Welcome to this session on the Australian Charities and Not-for-Profits Commission. Particularly, we'll begin with the policy context in which the ACNC is operating. We'll be looking at the not-for-profit sector around Australia. We'll certainly be looking at the role of the ACNC and the obligations that there are on charities once they are registered with the ACNC. As most of you would be aware, it is government policy to abolish the Australian Charities and Not-for-Profits Commission. The intent in that policy has largely been outlined in a paper that was developed by the Department of Social Services, which was called an options paper, which looked at the intent of the government to move the functions of the Australian Charities and Not-for-Profits Commission back to the Australian Taxation Office, the ATO, and to the Australian Securities and Investment Commission, ASIC, for those companies limited by guarantee. The intent, as written into the DSS discussion paper, is to archive the register and to implement a form of self-reporting. And what that would mean for charities is that all charities would be required to have a website, and you would be required to put onto the website the kind of report perhaps that you provided in your annual report or that you provided in your AGM, that kind of information that you would normally provide to members, to donors, to beneficiaries and the like. So the context at the moment is that the Senate's voting intentions are unclear. Clearly the government supports its own legislation when it goes to the Senate. The Labor Party, the Greens and Senator Nick Xenophon are on the record saying they will not support a repeal bill. So if there are a couple of other votes that do not support the repeal bill, then the legislation won't go through. Now, the implications of this for the ACNC are that we have needed to operate in two modes really since our inception. One mode is that we proceed to implement the Act on the possibility that the Senate will not support the repeal bill, which means that the ACNC could open its doors the next day and could continue as the Parliament has determined. However, should the Senate support the repeal bill, then the government needs to be ready to transfer the functions of the ACNC in a smooth fashion to the ATO and to ASIC. As a result of that, the ACNC is also planning for its own demise, so that if the repeal bill is passed, then there would be a smooth transition of function. Most of you would be aware, required to implement the Act. It's an Act of Parliament, and until such time as Parliament votes otherwise, then that's our job, and we're doing it. But we're not blind to the government policy. We respect government policy, we respect the democratic intent in that, and we're working with other departments should the repeal bill be supported. So moving on, there was some data released by the Australian Bureau of Statistics on the 30th of June. Every few years they produce a satellite account devoted to the not-for-profit sector based on a sample of not-for-profits, and it gives us some insights into these economically significant organisations as to the contribution that they make to the economy. The first figure that's there, that 600,000, is still an estimate. That's based on the work of Professor Mark Lyons, and that is the estimate that's generally accepted as the likely number of not-for-profits in Australia. Most of those will have no legal form. They'll be groups of people getting together in local communities with shared interests, but without a need to enter into a contract to lease premises or whatever, and no need to have a legal form, and so they operate in an informal way. However, of those not-for-profits that have taken a legal form, some 60,000 of them are charities. I'm going to come back to that figure, because we know it's not a fully accurate figure, and we are working very hard to get to the exact number of charities operating in Australia. It's also estimated, and we still, again, haven't got the exact figure on this, there are probably somewhere between 130 and 140,000 entities that are not-for-profit, inclusive of charities, have a legal form in Australia. But you can see, until we get these data sets finalised, we won't fully know. Very significantly, when you look at the size of this sector, 4% of GDP, or this is a sector that contributed $58 billion to the economy last year, at a rate of 6% growth per annum. Very significant when you look at some sectors are going back, some are pretty stable. Not-for-profit sector, a massive contributor. Over 1 million employees, that's 10% of the Australian workforce. And if you think about what that could mean, if that work were costed, the contribution to the economy, not just to healthy communities, but to the economy, it's a very dramatic figure. Now, Melbourne, this is what we do each place we go to. We've gone into our database and we've got the information on charities in local areas. Melbourne's got close to 10,000 charities registered in the local area. Very significant number of charities. Huge, you think about that, that's a huge part of the Victorian community and the Victorian economy. The top beneficiaries are the general community, children, youth, aged persons and women. Notice that some 4,074 operate nationally, and that some 5,559 operate internationally. These are very significant figures. When we've been to regional areas, and we have in these sessions, what's clear is that in regional and rural Victoria there are very few charities that are operating internationally. I think for me the most dramatic figure for Melbourne and the general area around Melbourne is that only 36% of your charities rely on volunteers. In other words, there's a lot of paid employees in the charitable sector in Melbourne. When we've been to other places, the reliance on volunteers in some communities is as high as 83%. So we've got higher than average large charities and medium charities. So 65% of small charities. Once we've got verified data, we expect that the percentage of small charities will come in at around 78%. And you can also see when you look at that data that overwhelmingly these charities have been around for a long time. So that just gives you some insights into the charitable sector here in Melbourne. Now, looking at the ACNC and our functions, we do have the functions of registration, which some of the newer charities would be very aware of, reporting and compliance, and I'm going to go into that in detail, the charity register and the sharing of data that comes from that, and then advice and guidance. And indeed today's session is one of the sessions that is part of that advice and guidance role that we have. Of course, much of the advice and guidance is provided on the website. We are a national body but located in Melbourne, so for most charities the easiest way for them to get information is to either visit the website or to phone through to the ACNC. So having just a little bit of a look at the team and the objects of the ACNC, you can see from that happy snap there that that's the executive. There's myself and two assistant commissioners. One of them hiding in row 3 on this side is Murray Baird, who came to the ACNC as a partner with Moores Legal and has added, I think, tremendously to the level of technical expertise in the ACNC. Murray's a recognised expert in charity law in Australia. In addition, we have David Locke, another Assistant Commissioner who came to the ACNC from the Charity Commission of England and Wales. David had been the Director of Charity Services there for a decade, and so it was tremendous to get a member of the senior team who had been actively involved in supporting charities over a sustained period of time. what we're also pleased about is that we have at least 5 members of our staff who've come from the charity commissions in New Zealand and in the UK. So that's been great because we're the first national charity regulator in Australia. Looking at how we take our regulatory approach, we begin from an assumption of honesty and we do give charities opportunities for correction, and what we try and do is intervene in as proportionate and light touch a manner as possible. But this pyramid is a way of illustrating in a graphical form the approach that we take to compliance. And I like to think of the compliance as having 2 tracks. There's a level of soft compliance, if you like, and that is that charities are required to meet certain obligations to maintain their charitable status. One of those key obligations is to provide an annual information statement. But you're also required to maintain your charitable status, to continue to operate for charitable purposes, to continue to be not-for-profit. So in other words, if you generate a surplus, put it back to charitable purposes. And there's some specifics in the Act that you would have seen, those of you who've read it carefully. You're not allowed to launder money, you're not allowed to finance terrorism, and so on. But now let's look at the sharper edge of compliance. And that's the edge of compliance when someone has made a complaint to the ACNC about a charity. Since we've begun, we've had more than 900 such complaints. Now, some of you who've taken the opportunity to have a one-to-one session with our staff this morning, these are the staff who'll answer the phone when you phone in with a complaint or someone rings in with a complaint about you. What happens at that point is that we try and determine if it's a matter that can be sorted out by the charity itself. So let's say you've got an issue that related to a particular therapy that a charity is using. Well, we would recommend, and in fact we may well liaise with the health commissioner in the state or territory. It may well be that there are issues that we would deal with, such as matters of the management of the finances of the charity. We would certainly deal with it if it looks like there's harm to beneficiaries. We would certainly deal with it if it looks like that there are charitable assets that may be at risk, and of course if there are issues of the governance standards. So once we've determined whether it's something that you can deal with, if let's say it's a matter of a conflict of interest, a deemed conflict of interest, we would probably refer you to the website, to the information on the website, recommend that you take the issue back to the chair of the board or whoever and have the matter dealt with that way. If it's not resolved, we would say come back and we'll try and help you resolve it. Certainly, getting back to the sort of the sharp edge of compliance, when the matter, so we've decided that the matter is a substantial one, it goes through to the compliance staff. So the bottom of the pyramid, what you've got there is education and guidance. We have an obligation to provide you with enough information that you understand what's expected of you. And that's one of the reasons that we're running these sessions, because we've found that although 80% of charities completed their 2013 annual information statement by the due date, roughly 20% didn't, and we don't want to enact penalties, as penalties are enacted automatically. So we're trying to make sure that we've exhausted every possibility to make sure that people understand what was required for 2013, and to help you prepare for 2014. So going back to our second track, our sharp edge track, the matter's now gone to our compliance team and they've deemed, so roughly 350 of these matters have gone to the compliance team and they've had to determine how to take the matter forward. What I think is very significant is that overwhelmingly, when a charity realises that there's been some wrongdoing within its organisation, they have bent over backwards to work with the ACNC to address the matter, to improve the practice, to, if it's been associated with a particular individual, to deal with the individual. However, there's been more than 60 cases, very serious cases, where we've had to have a full investigation. And in that case, then they're the cases where we may well be working with other intelligence or enforcement agencies and going into quite detailed investigations. But going back to your pyramid, so we've approached you, and you're one of that tiny percentage of charities that are actually ignoring us or not taking much notice of us. So we've now said to you, all right, we can issue you a direction, we can provide you with a warning, we can give you a show cause notice. There are some considerable powers in the Act. If in fact you don't respond appropriately to that, then we can move to deregister or revoke your charitable status. To date, we've only deregistered 3 charities, and as I said earlier, the reason that we've been in that situation is that overwhelmingly those charities where wrongdoing has occurred, once it's pointed out to them, have been very keen then to address the situation. So what are your obligations? Well, to maintain your entitlement to registration, you should notify us of certain changes, and I'll show you quickly what they are. So you can see there your name, your address for service, responsible persons, that's your board members, and your governing documents. We are not a gotcha regulator. Our intent is to help you prove your practice, and I can give you a commitment that we will work with you. We will, if you approach us and say, look, I'm a bit concerned, it looks like a couple of board members haven't declared a conflict of interest, it looks like a contract has been let without going to competitive tender at inflated prices to companies owned by these individuals, what do we do? We'll say, okay, let's approach it, we'll work with you and we'll help you solve that issue. Going back to what your requirements are, you're required to keep records, and indeed every charity should, every organisation should keep records, and you're required to comply with the governance standards. So with good record keeping, you won't find these difficult. I'm really hoping that most people in this room have completed their 2013 annual information statement. You would have noted that that information is key corporate information. It didn't require any financial information. But from the 2014 period, you will be required to provide financial information. What you'll get when you go online, and happily, most of you go online, nearly 99% of you register and report online. So that's fantastic because the information is readily available. Certainly those of you who are providing your annual information statement, that means the information goes through immediately. With your annual financial reports that you can attach to the annual information statement, that is voluntary for small charities. For medium-sized charities, they're required to put reviewed or audited accounts, and for large charities, audited accounts. And from 2014, we've fixed a couple of errors. For example, there were a lot of religious bodies that inaccurately assess themselves to be basic religious charities. So we've put a lot more information into that section to help you assess accurately if you are a basic religious charity. So looking at the 2014 annual information statement, there are 19 questions, 17 of them are mandatory questions. It's basic non-financial information. For most of you, you won't need to change that information from what you put in for 2013. And here's a summary which I'm conscious the people at the back won't be able to read. It actually is a summary of the information I gave you a couple of slides ago. So just to very quickly summarise, for those small charities, yes, you complete the annual information statement with 9 financial data items, but you're not required to attach any other financial records. For those charities that are medium in size, 250,000 to $1 million annual revenue, reviewed or audited accounts, and for the large charities, you're required to affix audited accounts. That's the charities with revenue over $1 million. I just emphasise, if you're a basic religious charity, you're required to make sure that your annual information statement is up to date, but you're not required to do financial reporting, to add financial reports. So what are the benefits of charity regulation? Why would you be involved in all of this? I think for most charities, it gives you a badge of credibility. If you think about it, there are organisations out there calling themselves charities, or indeed there's some that we've dealt with recently that don't even necessarily call themselves a charity, but they'll use a word like foundation, institution, society. They'll call themselves national or Australian, and they'll find ways of giving themselves an aura of credibility, and in fact they're either scams or they're commercial operations. So we very strongly emphasise to people, check the register. If you're a household name, and I'll let me use one, Red Cross, because it is the most commonly recognised symbol in the world, so you are a household name. It is expected that you operate in a very professional manner. Everybody knows who you are. If you're a small local charity, people don't, but they can get onto the ACNC register and they can check that you do exist. They know that if you're with the ACNC, your bona fides have been checked and that you are required to operate according to certain governance and financial management standards. Of course, you get access to Commonwealth tax concessions. That wouldn't be lost on anyone in this room. That's very important to everybody. I think the next point is very important for the small charities. You get visibility on the charity register. So when a donor is thinking about making a donation, they can go to one site. It's a one-stop shop. I know that's a bit of jargon, but that's the reality. Instead of having to get onto the World Wide Web, search around. Let's say they want to donate to a homeless organisation, a charity here in Melbourne. The problem is that the charity may not have the word Melbourne in its title. So if you're Googling, you might not actually get all of those. If you go onto the ACNC register, you can put in postcodes, and then you can put in the nature of the charity that you're looking for, and a list will drop down for you. So that's for donors, for grant makers, for private ancillary funds. That's a fantastic resource, and we know that they use it. So for the small charities, that's incredibly important. For all of you, you get access to the online portal. In other words, once you've got your password, you can get on there and you can keep your own information up to date. One of the complaints that comes through to us from charities about their own organisation is the treasurer's left, the secretary's left, no one knows where they kept the information, and they haven't got any records. So once you've got the information with us, it's there, it's secure. And even if, the worst comes to the worst and the treasurer takes the password with them, we can always issue you another password. We'll put you through a few security ropes, but we can issue you with another password. So that's very important as well. You get access to timely advice, guidance and education, and we're very keen that sessions like this contribute to that. You get regulatory oversight. So, for example, the sort of issues that I mentioned when I was taking you through that regulatory pyramid, we can take action against charities that are acting improperly, and we do. We revoked the registration of nearly 250 a couple of weeks ago. One charity has come back to us and said, whoops, I am here. I just haven't got in touch with you. So we are fast-tracking their re-registration. And what that means for those of you who do the right thing, you get your reputation intact as a sector as a whole, and it means that the trust and confidence in the sector remains. And I think what's significant, of course, is the charitable sector runs on trust. People won't donate to you. They won't volunteer their time if they don't trust you, they don't think you're a decent organisation, and if they've got any qualms at all about your operation. You can share information and research. We have already. We actually gave back to the sector the analysis of the first 1,000 charities that we registered. We're about to release the findings of 2 research projects. I think one that'll be of great interest to people. We gave the first 40,000 charities that submitted their annual information statement for 2013 to Curtin University. They've done a major piece of analysis, and we're going to release that back to the sector within a few weeks. And what that means is that for the first time we will have reliable information on the sector. We've never had it before. So it means that there's now a point of truth, if you like, on the sector and how it operates. And finally, you've got the capacity through the register to get, and through the increased accountability and transparency on the register, to get extra information out to people, and of course to maintain that trust and confidence. I think the main point to make for this image of the register, for those of you who haven't got on yet to have a look at the register, is that we've had, and in fact now we've been using this presentation for more than 3 weeks. We're probably at around 400,000 people have been on and looked at the register, searched the register. For the charities themselves, again, it would be easily now 95,000 of you have used the portal. You've got your password, you've updated your information on the portal. So that's a terrific use of that resource that's there for you, and of course then becomes a resource for the community. When you look at the spread of charities across Australia, it's quite interesting. Victoria actually pips New South Wales. Victoria has got 31% of charities in Australia. Of course, Victoria, Melbourne in particular, has had a long tradition of philanthropy, so that's very significant. New South Wales has 30%. We have registered over 3,800 charities since we began in December 2012. That's quite a significant number. We're not sure if it will continue at that rate, or whether the fact that there's been a fit-for-purpose dedicated regulator has attracted people to register with us. You can see that the key purposes for which we've registered have been advancing education, advancing religion, social or public welfare, and public benevolent institutions. Now, of the charities registered in 2013, some 4,006 of them, this is over a 12-month period, were operating overseas, and nearly 800 operating nationwide. So that gives you a sense of why the sector lobbied for so many years to have its own national regulator. If you operate only in one jurisdiction, it's not such a big issue for you, but many charities operate across Australia, and those charities who are fundraising on the internet, then technically they're operating across Australia, even if they're only located in one jurisdiction, and that means technically you are meant to register and report in each jurisdiction. That's 8 times per annum. Having one regulator means, a national regulator means that you can simply do it once. Just for your interest, from the data that we collected from the charities that we've registered, the largest board has 36 members. The average number of board members is 5, which I think is quite a healthy number. It gives you enough board members to get checks and balances in there and a bit of breadth of expertise around the table. Mind you, the most common number of board members is 2. Now, given that there's a lot of trusts and private ancillary funds, that probably is the reason why, but that's very interesting. Though people involved in those organisations would just want to be sure that they're confident that they've got the checks and balances that they need. Now, moving on then to the issue of the red tape reduction that I referred to earlier and the ways in which we're going about it. You've got the register. The register operates as an open data source, and indeed we've put the information that's contained on the register, because it's public information, onto data.gov.au, which means that researchers or others who are wanting to know more, to analyse more about the charitable sector, are able to do so. We've also established what's called the Charity Passport. Now, when you think about it, your driver's licence and your passport are the 2 pieces of information that you hold that have the highest credibility with anyone who views them. What we've done with the information that you provide us, we have cobbled together or corralled the key corporate information that government agencies want when they're either wanting to contract services with you, or they're looking at grant making. This information then is available to be transported across government as long as those government agencies can meet the confidentiality and privacy provisions in the ACNC Act, and as long as they agree that the information will only be used for particular purposes. The only piece of information that's required to transport that information is your ABN or your legal name. And what that means is once the ACNC has information about you, no government agency should ask for it again, because that's the so-called report once, use often. We take the information and it's used repeatedly across government. It is unfortunate the uncertainty for the ACNC has slowed this down. There are a couple of Commonwealth government agencies now using the charity passport. We're hoping that if there's certainty about the ACNC's future and if the ACNC is operating in the future, that we get a much more dramatic take-up. It's certainly a requirement in the Commonwealth grant guidelines which guide the behaviour of Commonwealth public servants. So it should happen, and very quickly, if there's certainty about the future of the ACNC. We've tested it from an IT point of view, and we've trialled it with a number of Commonwealth agencies. Moving on, in terms of reducing the regulatory burden, that charity passport, as I mentioned, gives you report once, use often. 2 jurisdictions, South Australia and the ACT, have committed to aligning their regulatory and reporting obligations with the ACNC, which means if you're in those jurisdictions, you only report once, you report to the ACNC, and that suffices the requirements for your jurisdiction. So and again, that's on hold until the future of the ACNC is clarified, but that's the commitment of those 2 jurisdictions. In terms of our commitment to red tape reduction, we consulted very widely with the sector on what the annual information statements would look like, and some of you may well have been part of those consultations. You would appreciate we have a tension in the Act. One of the policy imperatives in the Act is to increase accountability and transparency, and that's through the provision of additional information. There is another policy imperative, and that's to reduce red tape, and of course that's usually through less information. So we tried to find a balance there. I really would like to emphasise that for this current reporting period 2014, for those of you, the medium and large charities who lodge a financial report with Consumer Affairs Victoria, that the same report will satisfy the requirements of the ACNC. You do not need to provide a separate report. And that's, of course, during this period of uncertainty, to make sure that there's not duplicative arrangements for you. Finally, some of you will be aware the Queensland University of Technology, which developed the National Standard Chart of Accounts, has given that resource to the ACNC to look after. It's an important resource for charities because all government jurisdictions in Australia have committed to accepting the NSCOA. And what you may not be aware of is that to date, MYOB has agreed to integrate the data dictionary that is NSCOA into their software packages. So those of you who are using MYOB will find that a useful resource. Moving on quickly then to the advice and guidance to date. I won't take you through too much of this, but simply to illustrate that there's been a huge take-up of the information that's been available on the website, the publications, and there are many of them in paper form today for you to take, and indeed in a CD-ROM for you to take today, and I would encourage you to do so. But you can see a huge number of phone calls, emails, written correspondence to the ACNC, and we've had more than 4 million page views of the ACNC website. Now, I talked a little bit earlier about the 2 tracks of compliance. One was the softer compliance where you really need to meet your obligations, but then there's the sharper compliance when there's a charity that has wrongdoing occurring within the charity and the ACNC is notified and intervenes. The only thing that I'm going to really highlight from this 12-month summary, and this is the kind of information that we're putting into our annual report, which will be tabled in Parliament in October. Look at the top issues that were dealt with in 2014. The top one was an inappropriate use of charitable funds. So that's the kind of fraud, money laundering, and monies being used for private benefit. So there are sometimes allegations that the salaries being paid to CEOs and the like are so large that they constitute a private benefit. That's often a matter for the board to deal with itself. But there have been instances where either items as large as houses or cars have been bought for the private benefit of members of charities, and we've been asked to intervene in some of those cases. A lack of accountability to members is the next most significant issue that we've dealt with. This, if anything, is a hotspot for charities. For those charities that don't call an annual general meeting, don't provide an annual report, they probably don't have a website with information, but they may and not be providing that. Some charities, for various reasons, keep their minutes confidential, and there may be a good reason for that. But if there's not, then many of the other members of that charitable community can get quite agitated. So where there's a deemed lack of accountability to members, this is a real hotspot and where we're quite often asked to intervene. You can have instances where responsible persons have failed in their duties. I mentioned earlier where there may be a conflict of interest that's not declared. There have been times that we've dealt with some serious issues where you'd have to say the board was asleep at the wheel. You simply cannot imagine how some of this activity happened under the nose of the board, but it has. So I think really the message from that is that those who take on the responsibility of being on a board of a charity, they really need to take it on seriously and to be quite diligent and to have the best interests of the charity when they're going about those duties. And then finally, and sadly and happily not in large volume, but involvement in criminal activity. So there's some of the issues that we've had to deal with. Looking ahead, now, as I said to you, the ACNC is in this strange duality where we're planning for both scenarios. One, the Senate passing the repeal bill, and the other is the Senate not passing the repeal bill. And we are somehow remaining sane in that dual role that we're undertaking. We are trying to really ensure that charities can meet their obligations. One of the issues for those charities that have not completed the 2013 annual information statement, they may not realise that the penalties for non-submission are triggered automatically in the Act. And as Commissioner, I have a fair degree of discretion in the Act, but I have no discretion over the administration of those penalties. They're triggered automatically. I have some discretion over whether or not the penalty can be remitted, but in the meantime, the charity is likely to have heard from the tax office, because the ACNC doesn't have money gathering powers, and likely to have been sent a letter of demand from the tax office to pay the penalty. In addition, in the meantime, it'll be on the website of the charity that they have not met that obligation. And that is likely to be an impediment for a charity when it comes to donors searching through for those charities that they want to donate to. If you know a charity that hasn't submitted its 2013 annual information statement, could we strongly ask you to advise them that it's really in their best interest to do so? The scenarios that look likely to play out in terms of the passage of the ACNC repeal bill mean that it's likely that we will be here for some months administering our Act, which means that we really will be in a scenario where those penalties for people who've not submitted will be enacted. So if you have any opportunity to prevent that happening, we'd ask you to do so. We are certainly making our best efforts to make sure that all charities who haven't yet submitted their 2013 annual information statement are aware of it and able to do it. And then finally, while we're undertaking these roles, as I mentioned earlier, the Department of Social Services has been consulting and is likely to provide some summary of the issues raised in the submissions within the next couple of weeks, and that will feed into the process of the drafting of the legislation of the repeal bill, which the Department of Social Services will do with the Department of the Treasury, because the ACNC is a regulator and the Treasury oversights the regulators. At the same time, the Centre for Social Impact at the University of New South Wales has now provided its advice to the Department of Social Services on what a national centre for excellence for civil society might look like. And of course, that National Centre for Excellence can be created administratively. It doesn't require legislation, and so we're likely to see that created at whatever time suits the government in terms of its own timelines. And that's not a matter on which the ACNC's consulted, but I think we can all imagine that that'll be a timeline over the next few months. Can I thank you for coming and wish you well in your endeavours. If you have any further need to contact us, there's some of the details. Thank you.